for Dr. Ehrman. The example of Jimmy Carter is hardly relevant. The disciples knew Jesus and lived with Jesus. How can that be compared with 4 students who knew nothing about Jimmy Carter?
No, that's a great question. It's a great question. There are very few scholars today who think that the Gospels were written by 4 people who were with Jesus. Even in the traditional scriptures to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Mark was not one of the disciples of Jesus. He was a companion of Peter. Luke was not a disciple. He was a traveling companion of the Apostle Paul. Matthew allegedly was the tax collector with Jesus. John allegedly was the beloved disciple. That's the traditional view. Most critical scholars don't believe that anymore. The Gospels were not written by people who are eyewitnesses, and the first point to stress is they don't claim to be. Matthew does not claim to be written by somebody named Matthew. Mark doesn't claim to be written by Mark. These ascriptions of authorship were added later, much later, decades later. The original authors wrote anonymously. The one thing we know about these authors is that they were highly educated Greek-speaking Christians who were rhetorically trained in Greek composition because the Gospels are written in very good Greek, following Greek rhetorical strategies. The disciples of Jesus were not Greek-speaking people, and they were not highly educated. According to the book of Acts, chapter 4, John and Peter were agrammatoi, which is the word for illiterate. They were unlettered, and that's probably right. These were people who lived a hand-to-mouth existence and were not educated. Very few people in the ancient world were educated. Probably at this time in Palestine, the best estimates indicate that at this time in Palestine, only 3% of the population could read. Far fewer people could actually write, and almost nobody, in fact, nobody that we know of, except for Josephus later, could write in Greek. So whoever wrote these books were later Christians living somewhere else who were not disciples of Jesus, and that's precisely why I chose the Jimmy Carter illustration, because the people who wrote these books would have been the people who would be like someone today writing about Jimmy Carter, having heard about him, not having lived with him.